UFO and alien topics have been a big part of the Top 5's YouTube channel. As you all know, we now run a dedicated channel that covers exclusively UFO content, aliens and conspiracies. Now this video is a 2-hour mashup of some of our best work over on DestinationDeclassified. But before we begin, we'd like to say a special thank you to this compilation sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online instructional platform built by creatives for creatives. It provides unlimited digital classes for subscribers from all walks of life, whether it be an artistic background or someone who seeks new mechanical skills. These classes give simple yet detailed deep dives into subjects like animation and photography, or more technical topics such as business analytics and marketing. The best part is, you can use Skillshare even as an amateur. The program is created for those trying new skills for the first time and allows you to switch through subjects seamlessly. Many viewers ask how they can edit their own documentaries or construct how-to videos. And through Skillshare, we found the perfect class called Learn Adobe Premiere Pro and Edit, a how-to video for beginners taught by Halis Narvaez. This course gives you everything you need to start understanding the basics of the editing software we use, while reminding us that with all creative things, putting the work and wisdom into the things we make is most important. Through our sponsorship, the first 1,000 subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of the premium membership. So no more waiting for that hunger for knowledge to fill itself. Join Skillshare today and gain the wisdom to improve the creativity in your life. Now, if you haven't already done so, hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy.
For investigators concerned with the topic, police officers are among some of the most coveted witnesses to UFO activity. Due to the very nature of their job, police officers are trained observers, meaning they are more likely to notice certain things during a sighting that ordinary people may not. They also tend to know the area they work in exceptionally well, and so they are more likely to recognize something out of the ordinary quickly, and how it impacts the area, all of which can provide crucial evidence to the sighting. Finally, working in such a high-stress and potentially dangerous job often fosters a degree of level-headedness, meaning police officers are less likely to be prone to their imaginations getting the better of them. Here we look at 3 fascinating encounters police officers have had from across the world with UFOs. So get comfortable, sit back, and enjoy. Burned by a UFO. Manuel Amparano was a police officer with the Kerman Police Department in Fresno, California on May 13, 1978. In the early hours of the morning, Manuel was driving his squad car on a routine patrol near Kerman High School when he observed what he thought was a palm tree on fire. He recalls that at the time he had seen a spat of fires started by destructive teens, and he rushed over to the scene expecting to catch some of them in the destructive act. As he approached the scene, however, he began to realise that there were no teens in the area, and instead of a palm tree, there was a fireball burning inside of an oak tree near a cotton field. As he arrived at the scene, the object began to rise up into the air until it was around 150 feet off the ground, and Amparano described it as being like a setting sun in terms of appearance. His patrol car was equipped with a powerful spotlight, and he began to train it onto the object in order to get a better look at just what he was seeing. However, before he had a chance to switch on the light, there was a sudden bright blue flash and the object made a sharp turn before silently moving away in a southwesterly direction at high speed and out of sight of the stunned officer. Amparano initially assumed he had seen some optical illusion, especially after contacting the local air traffic control room and weather office, neither of which could offer him an explanation. However, he soon began to feel sore on his face and chest. In his own words, it was like a sunburn when you fall asleep at the pool. There were white blisters on parts of my body facing that light. I also had trouble with sunlight. It was like right after you have your eyes checked and they are sensitive to light. That lasted about a week. Seeking medical attention for the burns, doctors at Fresno Community Hospital told him that in their opinion, the burns were caused by microwaves. Microwave burns are burn injuries caused by thermal effects of microwave radiation absorbed in a living organism. Based on this, Amparano's colleagues returned to the area to look for more evidence, but they would find none. However, locals reported that it would be years later that anything would grow there again. The Nemesis incident. Lithuania was the first Baltic state to gain its independence from the Soviet Union in 1990, and the years after were a turbulent time for the new country. The government and its police were in a transitionary period from communist authoritarianism to open democracy. Against this backdrop, two police officers, Janius Pazira and Lemis Krajalis, were on patrol near the town of Nemesis at half an hour after midnight on the morning of June 25, 1996, when they spotted a pulsating spherical object hovering around 20 to 30 meters above the ground. As they approached the object to investigate it, the two policemen became aware of a strange crackling sound in the air around them. They described it as being similar to the crackling of electrical equipment. Leaving their vehicle, they approached the object through a field of long grass, but when they got to within 50 meters of its position, they observed it start to move away before rising upwards and then racing away to the northwest towards Lithuania's capital city of Vilnius. In total, they had sight of the object for around half an hour. Unsure what to do, they both contacted their commanding officer and reported what they had seen. Within a few hours, a major investigation was being conducted of the area, involving teams of police officers. The scene was searched thoroughly by officers with sniffer dogs, while members of Civil Defense Department took radiation readings, although only background radiation was recorded. While the object was not seen again, members of the investigation team heard the strange sound that the two police officers had reported, and even managed to record some of it, but perhaps the most curious evidence was found on the ground underneath where they had seen the object hovering. The long grass was flattened in a circle with a radius of 10 meters. The abduction of PC Alan Godfrey. For Police Constable Alan Godfrey, the night of November 28, 1980, should have been a routine shift with the West Yorkshire Metropolitan Police Force. Yet it would forever change his life and would become embedded in British UFO lore. It certainly started routinely enough. The police had received a call regarding some cows that had broken out of a field, and Godfrey was dispatched to locate them. It was as he was driving along Burnley Road on the outskirts of Todmorden, he spied a sight he initially thought to be far more serious than a few missing cows, specifically a bus which looked as though it may have crashed. However, as he neared the scene, it became apparent that this was no bus. Instead, he saw a rapidly rotating diamond-shaped object hovering about 5 feet off the ground. He brought his police car to a stop and attempted to report what he was seeing, but his radio equipment seemed to be failing in the presence of the object. Suddenly, from Godfrey's perspective, he found that his car was now 20 to 30 yards further down the road, and looking back, the object had vanished, although he had no memory of driving further on or of the object departing the area. His shoe had also been mysteriously damaged in a way that implied Godfrey had been dragged along the ground. In all, he couldn't account for any event during the course of 15 minutes from when he encountered the object. Returning to the scene, there appeared no trace of it, although he did notice that despite the terrain around him being damp from rain, the ground over where he had seen the object was dry. Fearing ridicule from his colleagues, he initially didn't report what had happened. But when a member of the public reported sighting the object, he decided to tell his superiors his story. Somewhat awkwardly for Godfrey, West Yorkshire Police issued a statement regarding the incident, and he became the focus of intense media attention. Hoping to make sense of what happened that night, Godfrey agreed to undergo hypnotic regression in an effort to recover the lost memories. However, the results raised more questions than they answered. He recalled that after trying to radio his colleagues, he was blinded by a brilliant light and then fell unconscious. He then found himself inside a room, which he likened to being more like a house than a spaceship, complete with a large black dog. Godfrey recalls encountering a bearded man named Yusef, who only spoke to him telepathically, and who was accompanied by several small creatures which seemed vaguely robotic and had lamp-shaped heads. Godfrey himself has expressed doubts over the accuracy of the information he recalled during the sessions, speculating that they may have been confused with a dream, and almost 40 years later, he is still haunted by what happened that night. However, this is not the whole story of Godfrey's experiences with the mysterious. 5 months later, Godfrey was dispatched to investigate the discovery of the body of Zygmunt Adamski, a Polish immigrant who had been missing for several days. His body was found atop a coal pile in a sealed-off area, and in remarkably clean condition given his surroundings. It later transpired Adamski had suffered a heart attack at some point during the time he was missing, and to many it appeared as though his body had been deposited on the coal pile from above. The Coyne helicopter incident. In 1973, Captain Lawrence Coyne was serving as a reserve US Army helicopter pilot with the 316th Medical Detachment based at Cleveland Hopkins Airport in the US state of Ohio, flying Bell UH-1 Huey helicopters on medical evacuation missions. He was described by his peers as a level-headed guy who didn't believe in flying saucers or aliens, but he was not so sure after a harrowing flight on October the 18th, 1973. Just after 11 PM, he and fellow pilot Arrigo Jesse were flying a Huey back to Cleveland Hopkins Airport on a fairly routine flight. Two others, John Healy and Robert Janasek, were sat behind them in the main compartment of the helicopter. The route they were taking brought them close to a US Air National Guard base, where a flight of F-100 Super Sabre combat aircraft was stationed, but they weren't expected to encounter anything but a clear sky back to Cleveland Hopkins. And certainly none of them were aware of events that were taking place nearby on the ground. In their flight path was Mansfield, where Jim Carver, his brother Bill, and their father had become fixated on a trio of lights dancing around the sky. Recounting his story in 2013, Jim described what he saw through a set of binoculars the three of them used to watch the display. We witnessed the middle object perform incredible movements, dancing in the sky. The middle object wasn't as bright as the other two objects, but the maneuvers were spectacular. We could see red, green and yellow lights blinking constantly as we were viewing from a kitchen window. Jim observed the smaller objects merge with the larger one and then move off in a northeasterly direction. By then, many of their neighbours had descended on the area to watch the remaining object, but Jim was getting bored and left in his car, a decision he would later regret. For it was then that the gathered crowd heard the beating of the rotor blades of Captain Coyne's Huey slicing through the air. They watched with fascination as the object became aware of the helicopter and began racing towards it. The two men in the rear of the helicopter spotted it first and informed the pilot. At first they believed the red light was a navigation light on another aircraft, probably an F-100 from the Air National Guard base, but soon it became obvious this was not the case. The four Army flyers soon became alarmed at the pace of the object, and the fact that it appeared to be heading directly for them. The Huey was flying between 2,500 and 3,000 feet, with Jesse at the controls, but Captain Coyne quickly took over and threw the helicopter into a dive in order to avoid a collision with the incoming object. However, it seemed this was to be of no avail, and a collision appeared imminent, as Coyne later explained. At 1,700 feet, I braced myself for the impact with the other craft. It was coming from our right side. I was scared. The thing was terrifyingly fast. We looked up and saw it stopped right over us. It had a big grey metallic looking hull about 60 feet long. It was shaped like an airfoil or a streamlined fat cigar. There was a red light on the front. The leading edge glowed red a short distance back from the nose. There was a centre dome, a green light at the rear reflected on the hull. As if the sight of this incredible object was not enough, something even more mysterious had begun to happen. I had made no attempt to pull up. All controls were set for a 20-degree dive, yet we had climbed from 1,700 to 3,500 feet with no power in a couple of seconds, with no G-force or other noticeable strains. After that, the UFO left the area and flew off to the west, allowing Coyne and his crew to continue their flight unobstructed, while the helicopter appeared undamaged despite having seemingly been dragged nearly 2,000 feet upwards. Coyne said that the radio malfunctioned during the incident but worked perfectly again once the object was gone. Also, the magnetic compass on that particular Huey never worked properly again. According to the stunned witnesses on the ground who stayed behind after the incident, hoping to catch a glimpse of the UFO again, while it failed to make a return, the sky did roar with the sound of military jets shortly afterwards. No further updates on this case have been released. UFO over Moscow. The Soviet Union was once the largest nation on Earth, being spread over 2 continents and having 11 time zones. Born out of a communist revolution in 1917 and decimated by a German surprise attack in 1941, the socialist superstate was dominated by a culture of secrecy and paranoia, and this extended to UFO sightings. While we have a better picture now of UFO activity within the Soviet Union's borders until its collapse in 1991 than ever before, there are still many cases which have yet to surface officially. One can only wonder what may still be kept in an old Soviet archive about this fascinating area of UFO history. One incident which has come to light occurred in the waning months of the Soviet Union and concerns a series of sightings near the capital city of Moscow. While the Soviet Union was beginning to fracture politically in 1990, it was still a powerful military force, and Moscow was densely defended by air and ground forces. On the night of March the 22nd, Soviet air defense commanders began receiving queries regarding unusual air activity around the satellite city, Zagorsk, north of the main city. The commanders were puzzled by these requests, as their radar screens were clear, but when the witnesses insisted that there was an unusual-looking aircraft flying in the region, the air defense forces decided to scramble the two MiG-29 Fulcrum interceptors to investigate. Once airborne, the two pilots were vectored into the area where the latest sighting had taken place, and soon they too observed the mysterious craft and radioed back a description to their commanders on the ground. The UFO was a dark disc with an estimated diameter of nearly 200 meters and had two pulsating lights positioned on its sides. According to a statement released later by the Soviet Air Force, when the object flew horizontally, the line of lights were parallel to the horizon, but during vertical movement it rotated and was perpendicular to the ground. Moreover, the UFO was capable of rotating around on its axis and performed a series of S-turns, both in the horizontal and vertical planes. During the observation of the craft, it would sometimes accelerate to almost 3 times the maximum speed of the pursuing MiG-29s, and then suddenly come to a stationary halt and hover. The pilots reported that the speed of the craft seemed relative to the flashing of the lights on the side of the craft. The faster the lights flashed, the faster it appeared to be able to travel. Like the radar operators on the ground, the MiG-22 pilots were unable to track the object with their own onboard radars. However, the MiGs were equipped with a device known as Infrared Search and Track System, or IRST. This is a high-powered infrared camera that can lock onto heat sources, and this was the only way they could track the object before it disappeared for good. No further updates on this case have been released. The Alderney UFO. The Channel Islands are an archipelago in the English Channel between the United Kingdom and France. While not strictly part of the UK, being able to enact their own laws, the British government is responsible for the defence of the islands and also undertakes diplomatic duties on behalf of their people when dealing with foreign countries, most notably of course nearby France. The islands enjoy a thriving tourist industry, especially from Britain, and this has given rise to a number of smaller airlines being created to serve the air routes between them. For many of us, flying is still a relatively rare event, but not so for Captain Ray Bauer. In 2007, Bauer had 18 years flying experience under his belt, and 8 of those years involved ferrying small groups of passengers aboard a Briton-Norman tri-lander between Southampton in southern England and the island of Alderney on behalf of Alderney Air Services. So when he arrived for work on April 23, 2007, he was confident that it would just be like the hundreds of other flights he had undertaken before, but alas, this would not be the case. Bauer took off from Southampton with his passengers at 1338 hours and flew the southwesterly course to Alderney, a flight that usually took around 40 minutes, much of which was done on autopilot. Entering the final phase of the flight, Bauer's tri-lander was 10 miles south of the Isle of Wight at 4,000 feet, when he noticed a peculiar yellow light in the distance. At first, he thought it was an optical effect, but after peering at it through a set of binoculars, it was clear it was a solid object. It was long and narrow, being a brilliant yellow colour save for a dark grey band enveloping it 1/3 from the right. Bauer contacted air traffic control on the island of Jersey, and Controller Paul Kelly replied that their radar was detecting something in the area, where Bauer and his passengers could see the object but couldn't identify it, Boyer was then notified by one of his passengers that the object was not alone and a second one was nearby behind the first one's position. Meanwhile, air traffic control had made contact with another aircraft flying about 25 miles to the south of Bower's position, and the pilot of that aircraft confirmed that he too could see the strange objects. Boyer's aircraft was still closing on the objects, and he noticed that between its radiant yellow area and the dark grey vertical band, the objects were pulsating sparkling blues, greens and other hues, which strobed up and down the object about once a second. Describing the scene later, Boyer said, "This was a big object in the sky, a very, very big object. I did not want to be too close to it, and it was at that time that we had to descend to land. We descended through the 2,000-foot haze layer and lost sight of it. There was no hiding it, they were just there. I wasn't too happy, I was quite glad to get on the ground and have a cup of tea." As well as the other aircraft and the radar controllers, 2 tourists on the island of Sarg reported later that they had seen 2 large yellow objects in the sky while walking along the coast in the direction of Alderney. Analysis of the radar traces taken of the objects showed that they had been detected for up to 55 minutes, and after Bower's sighting, they began moving away from each other at about 6 knots. The first object headed northwards towards the Casquettes lighthouse, while the second headed southwards along the coast of Guernsey. It was later estimated that these objects were gargantuan in size, with each being a mile long. Bower's sighting is of particular interest to UFO researchers because it ticks all the boxes to have it listed as genuine. It involves multiple independent witnesses, all of whom described the same object, and was backed up with radar evidence from the ground. This of course does leave us the question, just what, or even who, was flying over the Channel Islands that day? There is a piece of footage we came across many years ago that we always thought needed to have more attention. While during a recent deep research into the UFO phenomena, the footage was once again brought to our attention. It took place in what is believed to be 1997 at the White Sands Missile Range, located in southern New Mexico, a site used by the United States Army, and has been home to many groundbreaking tests and military accomplishments, such as the first atomic bomb, the Trinity, which was test detonated at the Trinity site near the northern boundary of the range on the 16th of July 1945. NASA's space shuttle Columbia landed on the northern strip on the 30th of March 1982 as the conclusion to mission STS-3, so it's an important and historical location. But not just for those reasons, but also for this video, which since being released to the public, still leaves many of us scratching our heads. Take a few uninterrupted looks at the footage, and then we'll analyse. What's your first impressions? There's lots to unpack. Firstly, let's look at the angle of the object's descent. It seems to change, as if it's trying to save itself from crashing. But it doesn't work, and the object bounces across the desert like a stone on water, passes a rack of wooden poles, and ultimately hits the ground again, exploding in a shower of fiery glowing debris. The speed the object is travelling at has been calculated at 200 to 300 miles per hour. And given that, you would think that any man-made object would be obliterated when first making contact with the ground. It seems like someone was expecting this to happen, as the camera is already set up to capture the entire thing. The camera seems like it's on a tripod, so has been set up ahead of time, and is manned by someone who follows it across the desert. This is an important piece of information, as if this camera was set up to record it, then we know that it must have been a controlled test. However, there is one theory that we'll discuss later that could disprove this. But let's first look at the fact that what we are seeing is simply a missile test. In October 2011, the TV investigative show Fact or Faked Paranormal Files featured the White Sands UFO video in Season 2, Episode 7, and aimed to come to a conclusion on what it could be. Their conclusion was that it was a misidentified missile test. So what made them come to that conclusion? Well, firstly, they tested the possibility that a rocket motor test could be responsible for the UFO footage. However, they did fail to replicate the look of the UFO using a rocket motor. Next, they tested a 3-foot flying saucer design, but that too failed to replicate the footage. Next, they tested a missile, firing it horizontally, and although not like for like, they managed to get a similar trajectory to the UFO video. This led them to conclude the footage could well be a missile test, either gone wrong or intended to hit the ground and explode. We had a question in mind after seeing this: do missile test sites test rockets in a horizontal fashion? If so, this could help back up the claim that it was a rocket. We can confirm that missiles can and are tested in a horizontal fashion, so this definitely adds strength to the theory of it being a rocket. However, it still doesn't look like any rocket test seen before with the glowing of the object and the explosion. The glowing could be due to the rocket coming down from the Earth's atmosphere, or the glow could be flames themselves, or it could not be glowing at all and could be the fact that the video is such low quality. However, all three of these do not seem to add up. After browsing some forums regarding the footage, we came across a few interesting points. Now, we couldn't validate these, but they are worth mentioning. Apparently, a rocket test engineer said he had never seen anything like this before, and that test rockets simply do not glow like this before or after crashing into the ground, and certainly wouldn't disintegrate the way it did. When rockets or any objects crash into the ground, they usually explode into a dark grey cloud, not like what we see in the video. Again, we cannot confirm this, we just came across it during our research, so take it as you will. Another interesting thing we came across was apparently a NASA source working at Edwards Air Force Base, who said that a small-scale model of the X-38 space lifecraft crashed on a small-scale test range, with the range control officer executing a self-destruct procedure before it landed. So could this have been the footage we see? Let's go back to how this first surfaced. Jonathan Eisen submitted the video to a UFO conference in 1997. Jonathan is the editor of Uncensored magazine, a New Zealand-based publication that specialises in obscure news. Eisen recalled showing the footage as part of the International UFO event in March of '97 in Auckland, New Zealand. Shortly after, he took the video to Brisbane, Australia for the UFO conference there, and as a result of his efforts, it was later shown on television in Australia, New Zealand and England. Sherry Gottschall, a noted Australian ufologist, confirmed that the film was shown there in 1997. A friend of Eisen's, Anthony Ant Davidson, took the time in early 1997 to have the footage fully analysed, and this is what he said about it. I first image studied the footage, so the UFO was always centre of screen, and doubled the duration so I had frames consisting of one field only, Davison said. Then I took 2 frames, maybe 1 or 2 frames apart, and interlaced them, thus creating a video of stereoscopic images. The video was noisy VHS, but when converted to stereoscopic movie, it's quite clear the UFO is spinning around and around on its own axis. Clips the ground along a small portion of its circumference, and dust clouds appeared to travel towards the direction of the camera. Then it recovers until it crashes again and explodes. Davison also added that his analysis showed that the footage had not in any way been computer generated or modified, except for at the footage's very beginning, which featured a sort of fade in from a completely white screen, and which he discovered had originally been added for the Third Millennium, a Spanish language TV show. We're not sure where the exact original footage shown at the conference is, but we can assume it's longer than what is available today. Additional analysis was done on the video by CSETI, the Centre for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and they revealed that we determined that it was an experimental classified craft being tested, most likely by the US Department of Defense. But during our research, we also came across a few people mentioning that they had seen the footage on TV in 1997 on the 6 o'clock news in Australia. Apparently, it was stated in the news that a group of archaeologists conducting a dig on an Indian burial ground took the footage. Also, the original had about an extra 5 to 8 seconds of footage at the start, which showed 3 to 5 members of the dig in the direct foreground, and the camera tracks up and pans to the left to show the gliding disc sitting stationary in the sky. As soon as the camera focuses on the disc, it appears the actual act of filming the disc throws the disc out of control, and a second or two after this is where this footage picks back up. Now, this was just a passing comment we came across, so if anyone can confirm this, then this will add weight to the footage. Also, the fact that there could be a longer version out there somewhere is vital for the research efforts of this. We do know that the airbase where this was filmed do rocket testing, so that is the natural explanation for it. But then again, no one from the base has publicly came out to debunk the footage apart from online hearsay. We're fascinated by this and would love to come to a conclusion, but given the lack of evidence and information on it, we cannot. Given the fact that it was filmed at the airbase means it most likely was a classified missile test, and that could be why no one has spoken out about it. But what's your thoughts and theories?
What do you make of this next story? An investigation has begun into a claim that something strange came out of the skies and landed in the Welsh village of Broadhaven near Haverfordwest. Whatever it was spotted 3 times by children from the local school, and now their reports are being investigated by the British Unidentified Flying Objects Research Association. Now, the children say the object had a large dome, it was cigar-shaped and was silver in colour. Well, to find out more, I've just been on the phone to their headmaster, Mr. Llewellyn.
I know that 16 children saw it.
And did they all see the same thing, do you think?
There's a common core of similarity between all their descriptions. I got them to draw and to write what they saw.
And do you believe it?
I believe that they saw something which is not common in the environment in which they saw it, but whether they've interpreted correctly, I wouldn't know.
What would you do if you saw a UFO? Would you run to tell your friends? Take a picture or a video? Or just stare at it in awe and wonder? Most of us would want to say that we would try to get any kind of proof of what we were seeing. However, it's easy to say that when you're not in the moment. Sometimes the only proof you could have is either telling the story from your own eyewitness account or to draw what you had seen. For residents in Pembrokeshire Wells, 1977 was a year they would never forget, as several people throughout the year had reported seeing multiple UFOs, ranging from school children who, to this day, have never changed their story, teachers and other staff members who not only saw a flying craft, but as well humanoid figures making their way back into them, a family being stalked by a supposed spaceman, and also a hotel owner who witnessed a UFO landing behind trees, which led to a fire being started in the area. To this day, over 40 years have passed and nobody has been able to explain the events that were going on that year in Wales. The entire ordeal was so popular amongst not only the UFO community, but all over the United Kingdom. It was even given the nickname the Broadhaven Triangle due to the strange and unexplainable things that had occurred there. This is the story, or stories, of what happened in Pembrokeshire in 1977, and how it did nothing but further fuel the UFO craze. On February 4th, 1977, school children of the Broadhaven Primary School were gathering during recess to play in the football field nearby. But instead of the sounds of laughing and excitement, silence filled the air. The 14 children were in awe as they witnessed a silver, cigar-shaped craft hovering behind trees in a nearby field. The silence that came from it was something the children couldn't understand. that the size of an object this large should be producing the noises of a motor rumbling, as it would be common with any type of aircraft or vehicle in general. But the object just continued hovering, every now and then exposing more of itself from behind the tree line. Then, the children saw a figure moving around and eventually made its way out of the craft. Described as tall and silver, the figure didn't seem to notice the children, now deadlocked on it. As it moved out of eyesight, the kids almost simultaneously all ran back to the school to tell their teachers what they saw. When the principal heard this, he found it interesting that all 14 students were telling the exact same story with no differences in the retelling. Perplexed by this, he had them each draw what they had seen, and to the principal's shock, each drawing was almost completely identical. Mind you, each student was separated when they made these drawings, so the argument that they simply copied each other's work isn't valid. Take a look at these drawings and see what you think.
Spaceship, I didn't see the man. The spaceship, it looked a cigar shape with a dome on it, and it had a yellowy orange to red light on the top of it.
How clearly did you see it?
Well, I couldn't see its face because it was too far away.
Now, you say you saw a man as well, did you?
Yes.
And what about him?
Well, he was too far away to be seen as well.
My friend Philip here was trying to find a way over the stream, and I was looking at the bushes up the top of the trees. And then suddenly this silver cigar-shaped object seemed to pop up from behind the bushes and trying to take off. Then it disappeared again.
Are you sure it wasn't perhaps just a helicopter or an aircraft from the airfield near here?
A helicopter could land there, but that's private property over there. And if they landed there, they could be prosecuted. And with an aircraft, the only thing that could get in there was a Harrier.
Were you frightened at the time?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I thought there would be a whole army inside.
After this, the sightings of UFOs didn't stop. 13 days later, on the 17th of February 1977, the same craft that was described by the school children was also seen by a teacher and several other staff members, near the same spot as was previously mentioned. The teacher went on to say that they had made their way closer to the object and as well saw what would appear to be the same humanoid figure near it. But instead of attempting to hide or approach the teacher, it was reported that the tall silver figure quickly made its way back into the craft and almost instantly vanished. The teacher and staff reported this to the principal, and being that these were adults instead of children telling him that they witnessed the exact same thing, he took them more serious, to the point of actually contacting authorities to begin an investigation on the matter since the children's safety was a concern. The next reported sighting came from a farm employee named Billy Coombs. When over the course of a few weeks, he had several very strange encounters with things he could not explain that were witnessed by not only himself, but as well as his wife Pauline and their 5 children. One encounter was spotting a UFO while driving back to the farm one night. describing it as being similar to a torpedo with a bright glow on certain parts of the craft, and that it moved with extremely quick speeds. So fast, in fact, that if it did change direction, that it would do so quickly it would cause the family to struggle to even find it again. Yet, when Billy stopped the car to get out and look at it, the craft had vanished completely. Another incident was when Pauline was driving the children to school. She witnessed the same object in the sky, but this time it appeared to be following them for a short time, before again vanishing from sight. Pauline described the object being different than the first encounter, since it appeared to be so bright that it looked like it was actually on fire. In the following weeks, the family had also continuously replaced their TV due to it having frequent mechanical issues. Even after buying a new one, the same problems kept persisting. Not only this, but their cars were also affected by something they could not explain. Brand new alternators going bad overnight, a perfectly fine engine that had stopped working completely, and this continued on for several weeks. One evening, the family was baffled by seeing a herd of cows in a completely different field from where they left them, almost as if they had been teleported there by some unknown presence. Billy even double-checked and saw that the original field the cows were in still had its gate closed and locked. And to top everything off the family had dealt with, by far the one that stood out to them the most was one night while they were getting ready for bed, they saw an almost 7-foot-tall figure in what appeared to be a silver spacesuit looking at them from outside of their window. Being described as having a large black visor hiding any facial features. By the time Billy got outside with his gun, the figure was gone, never to be seen by the family again. Fast forward 2 months, and on April 19th, 1977, the hotel owner of the Havenfort Hotel, Rose Granville, was beginning her duties in the early morning when she spotted a brightly lit UFO in a nearby field. 2 humanoid figures in silver suits appeared to be gathering soil and measuring things on the ground. She stared on for several minutes, almost in a trance. When she snapped out of it, she described that an intense heat was coming from the craft, and even with the hotel separating her from it, she still felt the heat on her face. So much, in fact, that she described it as feeling like her face was burning. Rose quickly ran to get the other residents of the hotel to show them. By the time they had gotten back to the window, the UFO was gone, as were the 2 silver-suited figures. The following day, Rose made her way to the field out of growing curiosity, and she noticed the exact area where she saw the UFO had been burned an almost perfectly spherical shape into the ground. By now, with the numerous sightings that were being reported all around the area, enough was enough, and Rose contacted the police to get involved in the matter. Nicholas Edwards arrived the next day to interview Rose about what she had seen. And after the entire story had been laid out to him, he could not come up with an explanation to what she had seen the day prior. After visiting the area again, where the burned ground was, Edwards informed Rose that there was in fact a bunker nearby used by the RAF, and that he would contact the military to see if they knew anything about what was going on. When Rose was interviewed a second time by an officer from the nearby RAF Brody, by the end of it, he informed Rose that there was nothing stationed at that bunker, nor RAF Brody, that could account for the UFO, nor could anything there be mistaken as being cigar-shaped and silver. Let alone if one of their aircrafts were in the area, the entire hotel would have heard the roaring engine. Leaving Rose, the hotel guest, and the officer stumped at any sort of conclusion to this matter. This left more questions than answers, and the fact that no conclusive response could be given did nothing to calm the nerves of the community that was rife with alien fever. Going back to the school children, in the 40 years since the event happened, not one of them has ever said different or come out admitting that they were making it up. Now, even though that doesn't prove anything, it is interesting. Kids will seemingly make up stuff all the time, and then come clean about it or twist their story around so much that nothing makes sense. But for 14 people to still stick to the same story after 4 decades really stands out here. The Coombs family and their experience is also hard to discredit. Yes, they could have easily moved the cows from one pasture to another and could have lied about seeing an alien in a spacesuit. There also isn't any evidence pointing to them making it up. Why would Billy risk his job by disturbing and potentially losing dairy cows by moving them somewhere else, at night on top of that? Why would they want to subject their kids to something that could possibly traumatize them? And even after an investigation into all of these events by police, no answer could be given. The RAF conducted a separate investigation and strongly wanted to lean to the theory of it all being a hoax. But many in the community were not happy with that and claimed that they only wanted to call it a hoax because they were either hiding something or they had no way of solving it, and by branding it as fake would hopefully put the entire thing to bed. But of course, it didn't. In the decades following the events in 1977, there have been many theories on what the residents of Pembrokeshire witnessed. The UFO community, for a time, considered this very strong evidence of alien existence, due to the separate cases in the area and the amount of people who were witnesses. You also have to take in their background: kids, teachers, farmhands, and a hotel owner, all claiming to have seen things that they cannot explain, and still, to this day, have no possible answer to any of it, other than visitation from alien life.
We have a video filmed in Glasgow, 2 days after a few sightings in nearby Ayrshire, which we unfortunately cannot find any footage for. It's very difficult to see, but there is a flash in the sky, similar to that reported in nearby areas prior, and also reported in the nearby area that night. Take a look again. Some have said meteorites, and it could well be. What do you think? Next up, we have a possible UFO sighting filmed on Sunday, October 6th, 2019 at 5:35 PM in Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada. No details on this one, apart from location and time, although sightings of balls of light like this, disappearing in seconds, are recorded all around the world. What's your thoughts? This next one was taken in Cleveland County on Highway 74 on the 25th of October at 8 AM. The uploader has no interest in uploading UFO videos, and only posts train videos, so we are ruling out a fake. Certainly doesn't mean it's a real alien craft, but we are certain it's not tampered with. The fact there is the same spinning object by the trees suggests it could be a reflection from the car, as stated in the video itself, but we'd like to hear your thoughts. Up next, we have a UFO filmed in Albuquerque on Saturday the 29th of September, but not released until early October. Others in the area also spotted this. Some are saying it could be a satellite, although it doesn't seem to be moving. What do you think? This one was filmed on the 17th of October at 2:30 AM at an unknown location, although someone in the area of Englewood, Colorado witnessed the same exact thing around the same time. The filmer had witnessed this thing 2 nights prior to filming. No stars are visible, but it could very well be a star. Satellites don't blink like that, so we can rule out it being a possible satellite. What do you think? This next one was filmed in Barcelona, Spain. The objects were apparently hovering for several minutes before floating up to the sky. Our first thoughts were helium balloons, which they could well be, but if the poster is to be believed, then why did they hover without rising for several minutes?
control, so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared. It's all right. You can go right on and experience it. It will not hurt you now. I got to get my gun. All right. All right, that's all. Go to sleep, Steve. You forget now. You forget it now. You've forgotten. Calm now. Relax. Deeply relax.
When you think about aliens, what comes to mind? Flying saucers that move silently in the sky? Little green or gray men with big eyes and even larger heads? People being abducted and experimented on like a lab rat, to only be left with vague memories of the entire thing. These are all common staples in the UFO and alien community. Ever since it became a genre, there have been numerous accounts of people from all around the world coming into contact with extraterrestrials, with some going as far as recounting being abducted by them and taken to a distant planet, placed on a table and examined, or being given special powers from their interstellar captors. Many stories of alien abduction have been recorded. They are normally met with extreme skepticism since nobody ever has any proof that it happened. Their stories rarely are ever taken seriously, or at the very least, they are heavily questioned to try to catch the person in a lie. So, how did the subject of alien abduction even begin? And why was it immediately met with such strong backlash from the public? We as a society have traveled to the moon, yet the possibility of coming into contact with a species not from this planet seems impossible to most. This is a question we at DestinationDeclassified have wondered as well, so we're going to look at the story that is deemed by many as the first widely publicized case of alien abduction. The story that opened many people up to the idea that if there is another species out there, then they may have the means to capture us when they see fit to do so. This is the story of Betty and Barney Hill, and how their recounting of a night in 1961 changed UFO culture forever. The story occurred on September 19th, 1961, when the Hills were driving back to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire from Niagara Falls, a trip that would have taken them nearly 8 hours to complete. As the couple traveled and neared their final stretch home, Betty began to see a small light in the sky that appeared to move in all directions, and with each passing minute, the light became bigger and brighter. Excited by this, Betty told her husband to pull over so they could get a better look at it. Upon observing the light, Betty was able to make out a shape. Remembering that her sister had claimed to see a flying saucer a few years prior, she began to wonder if this was the same thing. The form of the light did seem flat and spherical, according to Betty. However, Barney was quick to assume that this was simply an airplane traveling north. That quickly changed when they both began to notice that the craft was quickly heading in their direction and was also descending rapidly. Frightened by this, the Hills made their way back to their car and left, making their way through the Franconia Notch, a mountain pass through the White Mountains in New Hampshire. As they continued driving, the craft followed them, sometimes moving ahead of them and rotating and then going back in their direction. Sometimes it would go so far that it was barely visible, and other times it was less than 100 feet away from them. Something both of the Hills noticed was that the entire time it was moving, it was completely silent. Picking up the pace, the couple attempted to get away from the craft, a feat that they both soon realized would be impossible. Fed up with the cat and mouse game, Barney stopped the car abruptly and got out of the car with his pistol to confront the craft. As he made his way to it, the object simply hovered silently above him, about 50 feet according to Barney's recounting of the event. He used his binoculars to get a better look and stated that he saw around 10 humanoid figures from the windows, all seeming to be staring back at him. He then noticed that most of them moved away from the windows and appeared to go into the direction of a large panel door visible from the ground. At this point, Barney said the remaining figure visible from the window somehow telepathically communicated with him and told Barney to stay where he was and to keep looking at the craft. The saucer made its way closer to Barney, and a structure from the bottom of it started to descend. Barney could swear that he saw figures in the lowering structure that somewhat resembled an elevator. He snapped out of his trance and ran back to the car, screaming at Betty that they were trying to capture him. Getting in the car, the couple sped off, but the craft quickly caught up with them. While Barney was driving through the dark, mountainous roads at high speeds, Betty continued to look for the craft to see if they had lost it. Suddenly, they both started hearing a rhythmic series of buzzing sounds that was bouncing off the trunk of their car. They both reported feeling vibrations throughout their bodies, and then suddenly, everything went black. The next thing they remember is hearing another series of buzzing sounds and returning to consciousness. Realizing that they were in their car still and had even traveled close to 35 miles with absolutely no memory of how they got there, nor could they recall anything between the time from hearing the buzzing sounds to waking up. When they eventually made it home, they quickly took showers and examined themselves. They left their luggage outside, not wanting to bring it in the house. Barney noticed that he had scuff marks on his shoes that he knew were not there the day prior. Betty's dress was torn in several places as well. The couple tried to remember anything that happened after they saw the craft, and they kept coming up with nothing. Both of them decided to draw what they remember about the flying saucer to see if it could stir up any sort of memory. Unfortunately, it was no help. Everything else was seemingly a mystery as well. Betty discovered a fine pink powder on her dress from that night, and when Barney examined the car, he noticed circles on the trunk where they had felt the vibrations coming from. He put a compass near it and the needle would spin rapidly, yet when he moved it away from the car, it would go back to its correct position. He tested this with several other compasses, only to have the same thing occur each time. Unable to just put all of this behind them, the Hills decided that they did need to talk to someone about what had happened. And little did they know that their story was about to start a community of UFO enthusiasts that would still continue to this day, almost 60 years later. A few days later, Betty began to check out books on UFOs from the library to see if she could learn anything about what had happened to her and her husband. Unfortunately, she was not able to find anything similar to what she had experienced. She was able to get in contact with the author of the book, retired Marine Corps Major Donald E. Kehoe, who was also one of the founders of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. The letter she wrote to him was passed to another astronomer and fellow NICAP member, Walter Webb. After this, Webb met with the Hills to talk in depth about what they had experienced that night. After hearing their story, Webb felt that they were telling the truth and urged them to consider going under hypnosis to see if it could jog any of their memories. While Betty seemed fine with that prospect, Barney was more hesitant as he seemed to be keeping a lot of what had happened tucked away and wasn't as willing to talk about it as his wife was. Throughout the next few weeks, Betty would periodically suffer from nightmarish dreams in which she seemed to be reliving the incident from that night on September 19, 1961. These ranged from herself and Barney coming to a roadblock to walking in the woods during the night with small gray men walking beside her. She recalled all of her dreams ended up with her and Barney walking up a ramp into a disc-shaped craft, and that once inside, her and Barney were separated from each other. The details following this differ. In one dream, she was being talked to by several men and was asked questions about who she was and what she did. Another dream consisted of her having pieces of her hair, fingernails, spit, and blood taken from her and placed into clear tubes. She recounted another dream where she was talking to one of the men and several others came into the room excited that they found out that Barney's teeth could come out. To which she actually laughed and told them it was because he had dentures, something that they didn't understand. One of the last dreams she had was different due to the somewhat violent nature of it. She was again lying on the operating table, and there were men watching her and speaking to her when one of the men took a large needle and shoved it forcefully into her navel, which caused her tremendous pain, and she immediately cried out, only for one of the men to wave his hand in front of her and her pain instantly vanished. She even got the names of two of the men, one being called the Examiner and the other being called the Leader. She even claimed that she was given a book by the Examiner to take home so that they could understand what was going on. Yet, when her and Barney were being escorted off of the craft, an argument broke out amongst the aliens, and Betty had to give the book back to them. All of these dreams occurred within weeks of the abduction, and as quickly as Betty started having them, they went away just as quick. During the remainder of 1961 and all of 1962, the Hills were interviewed by several members of NICAP and were still being urged by members to seek hypnosis to see if it could help them. Barney was still against the idea, but was somewhat coming around to it as he viewed it as something that would help his wife. The Hills also began to frequently travel back to the area where they thought they had encountered the UFO, but each time they failed to find the exact location. They also thought doing this would jog some sort of memories for them, but this was also a dead end. By 1963, the couple were no closer to finding answers than after the night it happened. Realizing that they were not going to be able to do this alone anymore, they decided to talk to their church about what they had experienced. They were not judged nor mocked for their story, and they were shown compassion by their fellow church members. Eventually, after a couple of months, the Hills were referred to a hypnotherapist named Benjamin Simon. By this time, Betty and Barney had attended several UFO study groups and were beginning to become popular subjects in the UFO and alien community. With a large number of people believing their story, it helped the couple go through with seeking hypnosis, and they didn't feel that they were crazy anymore. On January 4th, 1964, Betty and Barney began hypnosis treatment by Simon. The ordeal went on for multiple sessions over the course of 6 months. What you are about to hear are some of the audio recordings from those hypnosis sessions.
And I am satisfied. And I drive, and Betty is still looking, and she says, "Barney, that is not a plane. It is still following us." And I stop, and I look, and I see it is still out there, off in the distance. So I search for a place to pull off the road. And I see a dirt road to the right of the main highway. And I think this is a good place I can pull off, and if any car comes, it won't strike me. And I walk out, and I walk across the road. There it is up there. Oh, God damn it! Calm down. Calm down, it's there, but you can see it, but it's not going to hurt you. Go on. Control, so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared. It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now. I got to get my gun. I gotta get my gun! All right. All right, that's all. Stop. Go to sleep, Steve. You forget now. You forget it now. You've forgotten. Calm now. Relaxed. Deeply relaxed.
As you can clearly tell, both Barney and Betty were dealing with deep psychological trauma that for years they were not properly addressing. Barney seemed to be more scared and upset during his hypnosis, actually having to be told to stop by Simon due to him having a full-blown breakdown when talking about it. During Betty's session, she claimed that she saw a map while on the UFO, and instead of it being a two-dimensional map like everyone else is familiar with, it was instead a 3D holographic map. Simon wanted to test this, and he asked her to attempt to draw the map from memory. She was able to draw what she could remember, but at the time, it was nothing incredible. Simon credited that Barney's reactions were inspired by the dreams that Betty was having, arguing that the consistent things that he was saying were a result of what he was being told by Betty, and that information played into his subconsciousness. Both Barney and Betty disagreed with this, pointing out that both of their stories, while similar, had parts that were very different from each other. The hypnosis did appear to be an overall success though, as after this, the Hills didn't feel tormented by their experience anymore. Barney also accepted and made peace with the fact that he had been abducted by aliens and that he and his wife were examined and potentially experimented on. Things seemed to finally go back to somewhat normal for the Hills after this. They never tried to make any type of money from their story, nor did they volunteer to tell their story. The only time they would ever talk about it is if they were asked by friends or family. Thinking this would be something they would simply put behind them, that all changed in October of 1965, when a reporter for the United Press International picked up their story, and almost overnight, Betty and Barney gained worldwide attention. Having several books, documentaries, interviews, and even a motion picture made from their story. The talk of aliens abducting 2 Americans had now been thrown into the face of the world, and everyone was starting to become fascinated with the new possibility that alien life was upon them. Betty even went on to become a huge star in the UFO community, as she stated that over the course of the remainder of her life that she had witnessed a UFO on several different occasions. Betty's star map she made during her hypnosis sessions was included in one of the books written about her and Barney's abduction. The book titled Interrupted Journey by John Fuller was one of the best-selling books in 1966 and has become synonymous with their story. An elementary school teacher, Marjorie Fish, read the book and became interested in the star map. She began doing research and comparing the map to actual star formations, and while limited with her material, she continued searching. You have to remember, this was a time where not many people knew much about star systems, let alone what they look like. In 1969, an updated catalog of star formations was released by Wilhelm Gleacy. When Fish compared Betty's star map to the newly updated star systems, she found that one and only one seemed to match. And that was with the Zeta Recticeuli star system. While many dismissed this as proving nothing, there were also a large group of people who defended this as proof that Betty was on a UFO. As I mentioned, not many people knew a lot about star systems, and for Betty to recreate one when she practically knew nothing about them seems almost impossible if she were faking this entire thing. To this day, the map is still debated on its accuracy. Since 1965, when the story really took off, the events of Betty and Barney Hill have been debated by many people. There have been countless theories as to what they could have seen, how they could have faked it, or if something could have led to them thinking they saw something when they actually didn't. On the flip side to that, there are many who are passionate about UFOs who argue that this is almost certainly one of the biggest and most well-known cases of alien abduction that people still have no answer for. The arguments against it being real versus it being a hoax are equal in measure. What is known, though, is that ever since that night in 1961, millions of people have looked up to the stars and really wondered if we are actually alone or not.
Filmed in Surrey, England in early October, this one is very hard to distinguish due to the camera zoom and quality, but you can see a trail coming from an object in the sky. This is quite unusual to see in the UK, but someone has suggested it's flares from a plane. I wish we had more information and better footage on this one, but unfortunately we don't. This footage was filmed in Saint-Pierre, off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, on the 11th of October. The filmer said she saw an object hovering over the sea, and once she got home, she got her telescope and filmed it, as it was still there. It's so hard to make out exactly what's going on, or the orientation or anything, so we're not sure about this one. What's your thoughts? Filmed in Baltimore, Maryland on October the 13th, 2019, this cylinder-shaped UFO was seen whilst crossing the Key Bridge in the early morning. The filmer notices several objects going up and down out to the clouds. Then, after one of them dropped back out to the clouds and came down a couple hundred feet and stopped, the filmer started recording them. They said that with the naked eye, they could see white spheres going beside and around the crane, but the video doesn't show it. Many are saying it's just a blimp, and others aren't sure. What do you make of the footage? We have a debunk for you all. This video was actually filmed in the very last days of September, but quietly gained some traffic in October, being picked up by numerous news sites and published as a genuine UFO sighting, filmed in North Carolina's Outer Banks. Take a look, and then we'll put this one to bed. No UFO here. Those 14 lights are actually illumination flares from the bombing range near the mouth of the Neuse River. Many locals are accustomed to seeing them, so no aliens this time.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area shortly after 3 a.m. Pacific Wartime this morning. The anti-aircraft guns began barking during a blackout ordered by the 4th Interceptor Command at 2:25 a.m. The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the...
At 2:25 a.m. on February 25, 1942, air raid sirens began to quickly fill the ears of every resident in Los Angeles, California. Panic quickly began as many assumed that another attack on the United States was imminent. Some people fled to their basements while others armed themselves and headed outside to meet their attackers head-on. The city initiated a complete blackout, and the only light sources were those of the massive spotlights searching the skies for the enemy planes who were quickly approaching. Fast forward 5 hours and several buildings were destroyed, 5 people were dead, and over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells had been fired. As the smoke settled, many people were baffled at the lack of any enemy aircraft littering the surrounding area. It was almost as if what was in the sky had managed to evade the attack completely. This event has become one of the most contested arguments of alien visitation in history, a debate that saw the entire country open their eyes to the possibility that we were not alone after all. This is the story of the Battle of Los Angeles. Before diving into the events that happened in Los Angeles that night, I need to tell you about what life was like during this time. The United States was already experiencing the tensions of war. Much of the West Coast had already had bomb shelters being built, as well as numerous anti-aircraft guns being placed around the coastline. In the past several weeks alone, 12 American merchant ships had already been attacked by Japanese submarines, 5 of which had been destroyed. All of these attacks happening off of the waters of the West Coast caused hysteria and paranoia to continue to mount, as it seemed it was the only thing people would be talking about. Schools, movie theaters, radio shows, newspapers, and TV commercials all talked about the air raid precautions and the imminent attack from the land of the rising sun. This growing panic grew to a boiling point the day before the Battle of Los Angeles occurred. On February 23rd, about 100 miles off of the coast of Santa Barbara, an I-17 Japanese submarine surfaced and began to fire at the Elwood oil field. Luckily, most of the workers had gone home for the night, and only a handful remained. The attack started at around 7:15 p.m. and lasted for only 20 minutes. The damage overall to the oil field was minor, but that was not the goal for Commander Kozo Nishino. The reason for being there was to spread fear among the American West Coast, which was proven very successful. This attack came a little over 2 months after the events at Pearl Harbor, and the tensions throughout the country were now reaching its peak. The fear of a full-scale invasion was on the minds of everyone, especially now in California. A little over 30 hours later, those fears of another attack would erupt, which leads us to the Battle of Los Angeles. On the evening of February 24th, U.S. Naval Intelligence issued a warning to expect an attack on the California mainland within the next 10 hours. At 7:18 p.m., an alert was raised, but with no sightings of enemy planes or submarines, the alert was lowered at 10:23 p.m. For many, the lowering of this alert somewhat eased their growing panic. Unfortunately, it would not last for long. 4 hours later, the sound of air raid sirens flooded the city, and a complete blackout was ordered. Fear became almost uncontrollable at this point, as both soldiers and civilians were trying to catch a glimpse of an enemy plane in the sky. Some were running to air raid shelters, some climbed to the rooftops to see the enemy, and others got in their cars to flee the area. The months of tensions over the invasion were reaching their breaking point, and at 3:16 a.m., they finally snapped. For the next 58 minutes, a volley of gunfire shook the city. Anti-aircraft guns erupted from the ground. Explosions lit up the night sky in a sight of both terror and amazement. Soldiers began shooting the night sky almost on instinct as orders from the chain of command were getting lost in the chaos. People were screaming, cars were crashing, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Many people started claiming to see different things. Some claimed to see a giant zeppelin. Some said they saw a fleet of over 200 planes. Some said they saw over 2,000. Others said it was a large round object and it wasn't being affected by their gunfire. The entire scene was utter chaos. For 58 minutes, the deafening sound of war erupted from Los Angeles. Until an all-clear sign was given at 4:14 a.m. And after that, silence. A few hours later, the blackout was lifted at 7:21 a.m. When people left their homes to expect the damage to the city, they were very surprised by what they saw. Instead of seeing enemy planes littering the city streets or buildings reduced to rubble, they instead saw everything was perfectly fine. There was no major damage to any structures with the exception of a few wrecked cars and minor damage to buildings. 5 people had died, 3 from car accidents while fleeing the area, and 2 others from a heart attack triggered by the stress from the explosions and screams. A few buildings were damaged, but only cosmetically, with a few broken windows and some peppered with bullet holes. What people couldn't understand was how. How did they hear what was essentially a war going on right outside of their homes leave so little damage? This was a question that wasn't just on the gossip train of suburban families. Several military and political leaders were wondering the exact same thing, and the answer to that question is still debated to this day. Shortly after the blackout was lifted, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox was the first to admit that the events from the night prior were all a false alarm, and that the high tensions felt by everyone led to what they called war nerves, which in turn led to one person seeing something, and like a chain reaction, once one gun was fired, many followed, until everyone out there was trying their hardest to bring down the night sky. The following day, the Secretary of War Henry Stimson voiced that he agreed with Army General George Marshall that a minimum of 15 enemy planes were seen in the city that night, and that they could have been doing it not in a means of an attack, but instead a means of psychological warfare to further generate the fear in the public, as they were already reeling from the prior day's events with the I-17 submarine. The only problem with that theory is that nobody seemed to question at first is that how would 15 planes manage to completely avoid an essential rain of hellfire for almost an hour? Not to mention the over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells that were obliterating the sky that night, and for not a single plane to be struck not only sounds like something impossible, but more so seems to fall into the category of complete fabrication. Adding to this was that the following day there were numerous unexploded anti-aircraft shells in the area that many police actually dug up and returned back to the Army. Confusion was rife as many media sources were saying directly opposite things of each other. One source claimed that after the sighting of the enemy planes, that the Army quickly sent their own planes after them. Yet, this is a complete lie, and in actuality, all American planes were grounded at the time due to the high risk of being hit via friendly fire from the anti-aircraft guns. With no credible answers being provided, conspiracy theories seemed to be almost destined to arrive in their stead. One of the first and most popular theories on the events were that it was a plot by the US government to take away Southern California's war industries, particularly the aircraft industry, and move it more inland. Another theory was that it was a scare tactic actually used by the United States military to scare people enough to stop any attempt at trying to remove the military from the coast, as many were starting to talk about the stress the area was feeling was a direct result from the large amount of military being in Los Angeles. Still, this doesn't resolve the main question of what exactly, if anything, was the military firing at that night. Conflicting reports from the Navy, Army, and even civilians all clashed. The Navy claimed nothing was in the sky and it was all just nerves and excitement. The Army claimed that at least a dozen planes were seen flying in the area, while civilians were saying they saw over 200 planes in the sky, an object the size of a Zeppelin, and even that there were Japanese Americans on the ground signaling where to attack. The only thing people could seem to agree on was that they couldn't agree on what it was. It continued in this state with theories running rampant, and one theory began to stick out from the others, a theory that this was contact from a UFO, and while many at first laughed at the idea of this being the case, the arguments being made to defend it were hard to ignore. The biggest part of the UFO theory is this picture. This was the photo that has become a staple in the UFO community. The massive spotlights all converging on seemingly one object. People argued if, in fact, there were multiple enemy planes in the skies that night, then the military wouldn't have used all of their spotlights on one singular target. Then why did they? They cannot lie and say that it never happened because the proof is there that this did occur. But why did it occur? There is a claim that a Zeppelin was seen in the sky that night, and that is what the light beams are focusing on. But even if that much attention was shown on a Zeppelin or blimp, then no doubt there would be more accurate records of what was seen. The UFO angle comes in here, as it being a cover-up by the military, that they did see one and in fact did shoot it down, and it was quickly recovered on the ground, and the rest falls into cover-up and conspiracy, that the wreckage is still hidden somewhere to this day, much like Roswell. There were also several witnesses that claimed that what they did see in the skies that night was a saucer-shaped object that moved quickly and actually was able to avoid all incoming fire from the ground. Another witness quoted seeing the object and said, "The object was huge. It was really enormous. It was practically hovering right over my house. It hardly moved at all. It looked like a lovely pale orange and about the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Other reports claimed that there were multiple UFOs, but not near where many of the searchlights were focusing. Several people came out to say that they were silently hovering above a park, a school, several homes, a parking garage, and one was over the waters off of the California coast. Unfortunately, all these are simply reports, nothing concrete, no pictures, no videos, nothing. Just words from a public that was already on edge from what many assumed would be the last day of their lives. The UFO theory does hold weight in the sense that nothing remotely explainable at the time in the 40s could dismiss it. The conflicting reports from the Navy and Army, the fact that no wreckage had been found, and the unwillingness to talk from soldiers really made people start to open their eyes to the possibility that aliens had finally made contact, which in itself created a new wave of fear in many, as it wasn't bad enough to have to worry about attacks from the Japanese forces, but now they had to worry about another species altogether possibly planning an attack. It even went as far as people verbally accusing the military of possibly starting a war with an alien race. As if they were merely attempting to make contact, they were met with a barrage of artillery fire. The speculation and lack of any direct answers continue to fuel this wild speculation. After the end of World War II, when America was starting to be able to breathe a little easier, many still wondered about that night in 1942 and what it really was. Some assumed that since the war was over, the answers could finally be given. And one answer that was given was from the Japanese government themselves, and they went on record to say that no planes were flown over California during the entirety of World War II. And while this eased some minds for those who thought that this was a UFO, it did nothing but point to alien life finally making contact. Debate about what it was became somewhat of a running joke amongst the United States, that aliens visited on possibly the worst night that they could have. And for years, in fact almost 4 decades, no conclusive answers were ever given. That was until 1983, when the United States Air Force issued a statement that they felt would put the entire ordeal to bed once and for all. The Air Force went on to say that after an extensive study found that weather balloons, which had been frequently sent over Los Angeles, were the cause for the entire thing. This can be supported from many of the anti-aircraft units at the time who went on record saying that whatever it was in the sky was moving too slow to be a plane, and that the objects didn't even seem to try to attempt to dodge or avoid any of the oncoming attacks. The pulsing red lights on the balloons could have been mistaken for enemy planes preparing to drop bombs. In addition, the large amount of smoke that had accumulated from the explosions mixed with the lights created the mirage of multiple planes in the area. And as convincing as this all was, it still didn't answer the question of why was there no debris on the ground? Why did multiple people say that what they saw were objects nowhere near the spotlights? And why, when the spotlights all focused on one particular source in the sky, could nobody see that it was simply just a balloon? These questions still remain to this day, and for many, this is a story that will never be given the exact truthful answer. It could have been a weather balloon, but it just as well could have been an enemy or friendly plane, a UFO, a blimp, a Zeppelin, or nothing at all.
This first footage was filmed in Kyiv, Ukraine, on an unknown date, but was uploaded to YouTube on the 1st of December, suggesting it was most likely filmed in November. Take a look, and then we'll do our best to analyse. At first glance, this looks pretty genuine, although almost too good. It could be a helium balloon, however it's moving sideways and not straight up, which is not usual behaviour for balloons. It's definitely not a blimp of any kind due to the height and movement. What we do know is this is 100% genuine filmed and not CGI. There's just too much camera movement to track something in whilst editing to pull this off smoothly, but that doesn't mean it's alien. What's your thoughts? Orange cigar-shaped object over New Orleans. On November 29th, a bizarre cigar-shaped orange light was observed moving across the night sky over New Orleans, Louisiana. The object was reported to the Mutual UFO Network, who published the details on their UFO stalker site. In the report, it was explained by the witness that as the object flew away, the light seemed to disappear behind a black outline, which the witness described as being dome-shaped. Take a look.
You see him? Look. What the f*** is that? Dude, they're like floating flames, dude. What is that? Dude, that's crazy. Alright, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. It looks like once they get up to a certain height, they go out.
It was viewed for about 30 seconds as it flew steadily across the sky with a black object before disappearing out of sight. No further information is available as of yet. Another UFO sighting in Louisiana, and this is a weird one. Take a look and notice how this thing moves and goes behind the tree, suggesting this isn't clever editing. The movement of this suggests it could be a race drone, as normal drones aren't usually that smooth. However, the lights are unusually bright. It could be a hoax, a modified drone to look like a UFO, but unfortunately, we might never know. What do you think of this one? A common occurrence with UFO sightings is the craft having an ability to move at incredible speeds and change direction in an instant. Very much like this footage. Again, we're not saying it's aliens, but until someone comes forward with more information, this is one decent UFO. Recorded in Chile on an unknown date and uploaded to the internet in November 2019, there is no further information on this one, and judging by the quality, we're not even sure if it was filmed sometime before November. At first, we thought this could be explained by car headlights in the mountains. However, when you look closely, that possibility really doesn't seem to work. What do you make of this one? UFO recorded over active volcano in Mexico. Cameras set up to monitor activity from the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico have apparently captured a strange object flying overhead. In footage released by the YouTube channel Vic, the object begins to appear over the volcano at around the 10-second mark of the video, before seemingly growing brighter and then flying away from the volcano. As the object departs, a faint trail can be seen behind it. At first, most who see the video assume it's a meteor, but that idea is squashed when it can be seen moving upwards and away from the volcano. The sightings coincided with activity from the volcano, with the website Volcano Discovery listing a total of 6 explosions recorded in the days after the object was recorded. The site outlined that 2 of these were moderate explosions, while the other 4 were only minor ones. Popocatépetl is the second highest volcano in North America, rising to over 17,801 feet in height, and can be seen on a clear day from Mexico City, some 70 miles away. In UFO conspiracy circles, the volcano has been attributed to housing an underground UFO base, a belief supported by Scott Waring of the ET database, who believes the video shows the UFO materializing from said base. The video certainly is unusual, but in the opinion of this channel, no solid conclusions of any kind can be taken from it, and it remains a mystery. Filmed at around 7:45 PM on November 13th, 2019 in Dubai, a single UFO was spotted and recorded by multiple people. After a while, the object disappeared and 2 more appeared, supposedly out of thin air. Apparently, the local planetarium was contacted and confirmed that these were not skydivers, and that it was flight activity. They stated the object was not natural, nor was it a meteorite, but no one seems to know exactly what these things were. Helicopters were also reported in the area during and after these things were spotted and filmed. Filmed in Oak Bay, Canada, we've never seen anything quite like this one before. See what you think and we can discuss. Almost too good. It looks like a flying turtle at times. We're sure this isn't alien of any kind, but still do not know what it could be. It's too strange looking to be a drone, unless it's modified. What's your thoughts on this one? A video was uploaded to the YouTube channel Terry's Theories, which has sparked some debate, as it shows 4 objects passing by the face of the moon. 3 objects appear to travel down the screen in a triangular formation before rotating around one another just as they leave the light of the moon. Then just a few moments later, another solitary object follows behind. Viewers who have seen the footage are divided in opinion, with some claiming they are simply birds flying in front of the camera, and their scale is being skewed by the camera focus, making them appear further away than they are. Others have suggested space debris, either natural or man-made, while the more skeptical have of course claimed the video is a hoax. There's no denying the video is unusual. The question is therefore, what do you think? When we start discussing the topic of crashed UFOs recovered by shady government agencies for research and reverse engineering, we tend to associate such activities with the United States and the Central Intelligence Agency. Roswell, unidentified metals, and alien autopsies carried out at a remote location known mysteriously as Area 51 have all become embedded in popular culture of the West in the last 60 years. But if UFOs have crashed to Earth on more than one occasion, then it would be foolish to think that they only crash in the United States, or that the US government is the only world government in possession of such craft. Founded out of the ashes of the post-revolutionary Russian Empire, the Soviet Union was at one time the largest nation on Earth, spanning 1/8 of the planet's landmass. Being the premier superpower of the communist world, its influence also dominated Eastern Europe, East Asia, and parts of South America and Africa. If a UFO were to crash in any of these areas, then it would likely be the Soviet government who would be called in to recover the craft. Being in competition with the US throughout its lifetime until it collapsed in 1991, the Soviet authorities would have every reason to keep the recovery of such a craft a secret. Any technology that could be reverse engineered and applied to their own military equipment would offer the Soviets an enormous advantage over the United States in the so-called Cold War. So what evidence is there that the Soviet Union had its own UFO recovery program? Like in the West, a number of prominent people from the Soviet era have come forward in later years and admitted to knowledge of possible alien craft being recovered by Soviet authorities and held in their own equivalent to Area 51. One such location has long been rumoured to be the Kapustin Yar facility in Western Russia, where experimental rockets and missiles have been tested since the 1940s. One Soviet citizen to come forward is Marina Popovich. While Popovich is a relatively obscure figure in the West, she was at one time one of the most famous women in the Soviet sphere of influence, being a celebrated military test pilot, flying some of the most advanced and capable warplanes in the war during the 1960s, at a time when Western air forces were almost totally male-dominated. Marina was setting over 100 aviation records, with perhaps her greatest claim to fame being the first Soviet female pilot to break the sound barrier. This accolade earned her the nickname Madame Midge. An extremely determined individual, she attempted to join the Soviet space program but was ultimately unsuccessful, although she would go on to marry cosmonaut Pavel Popovich, the 8th man to fly in space aboard the Vostok 4 spacecraft. Despite this setback, she continued to break aviation records, joining the Antonov Design Bureau, where she flew some of the largest aircraft ever manufactured in the world, such as the enormous AN-22 transporter. She retired from flying in 1984 to pursue her passion for writing, and it was then that her association with UFOs truly began. Popovich had long been a believer in UFOs since her earliest days as a pilot, claiming she had observed several mysterious objects while in flight beginning in 1962. In 1997, she told a reporter of one such encounter while she was piloting a MiG-21 interceptor. "We thought it could be an enemy intruder, but it was so large that this was impossible. A collision looked unavoidable, but then the object tipped sideways and disappeared in a flash." She would confess later that even before the fall of the Soviet Union, she was part of secretive UFO investigation groups who met clandestinely to discuss sightings. They had to meet this way for fear of being discredited by the state if they went public. After the fall of the Soviet Union, witnesses suddenly felt free to come forward with their sightings, and this began the more formal stage of her research. Popovich claims that she was made aware of around 3,000 UFO sightings made by military and civilian pilots during the Soviet era. Using her fame as a test pilot and a certified hero of the Soviet Union, she effectively became the face of the Russian UFO scene in the 1990s, travelling to Western countries to share UFO sightings and research as part of an increasingly global investigation effort into the phenomena. But her experience as tough and level-headed test pilot meant that she accepted nothing at face value and would probe every sighting thoroughly in order to weed out cases of misidentification. She even admitted that as many as 90% of all UFO sightings around the world turn out to have completely rational explanations, allowing her and her associates to focus on the remaining 10% that don't. With this in mind, we can't help but be fascinated by the claims she made about crashed UFOs recovered by Soviet Union, claims that she has vehemently defended during her time as an investigator. She blasted onto the Western UFO scene in 1990 when she presented the now famous last photo from the Phobos 2 space probe that the Soviets had sent to Mars, but subsequently lost contact with. The image appeared to show a large cigar-shaped object approaching the probe just before contact was lost completely. Many have speculated that the probe was attacked by an alien craft or even an experimental American interplanetary weapons system, while others believe it was simply a computer malfunction. Either way, it was curious how many probes have malfunctioned approaching the Martian moon, and it will be interesting to see what happens when the International Martian Moon Exploration Probe arrives there in 2025. Since then, she has repeatedly made clear her belief that the Soviet, and now the Russian authorities, have either pieces of crashed UFOs, or possibly larger intact ones. She claims that her research had uncovered evidence of no less than 5 UFO crash sites in the Soviet Union, including one that caused the famous Tunguska explosion of 1908, in which a 10 megaton explosion flattened 2,000 kilometers of Serbian forest. Only a nuclear detonation could have produced such a blast, but the first atomic weapons couldn't be detonated until 32 years later. If true, what is especially fascinating is that the blast occurred during the times of the Russian Tsar, before the rise of the Communist Party and the Soviet Union. One can't help but wonder if the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, was the first world leader to have pieces of a UFO come into his possession. Other possible crash sites within the Russian sphere of influence that Popovich claimed provided Moscow with alien craft or technology include one just outside of Tallinn, in present-day Estonia, the 1988 Hyde 611 incident, where a UFO supposedly crashed near the town of Dalnogorsk, and most recently, near Novosibirsk in Serbia, where UFO fragments were reportedly recovered in 2012. Perhaps one of her more startling claims was that while the US may have worked on building advanced aircraft using recovered UFO technology, the Soviet Union were looking at using UFO technology for genetic engineering purposes to produce superior soldiers. In 1991, she told a captive audience at Berkeley University in California that Soviet scientists had exposed human blood samples to a reported UFO landing site. Upon studying the samples later, they found the blood samples had undergone chemical changes, and that from this experiment they looked into making some kind of alien, or at least alien tech/human hybrid. Popovich claimed that she had been secretly shown the product of this hybrid research with a series of photographs showing alien-human hybrid children, but could not produce this evidence for the public due to the risk towards her contact. It may sound far-fetched, but it should be noted that in the 1920s, Soviet biologist Leah Ivanov conducted research into creating a human-ape hybrid. It is believed Stalin had a personal interest in the program, with his aim being to create a totally obedient super soldier, but clearly the project failed. As we have found with similar prominent figures in the UFO community in the West, Popovich is not without her critics, and her beliefs have been rubbished or openly mocked, especially in the press, speaking of the possibility that dolphins were an early sentient associate of man, and her claiming to have seen a Bigfoot or Yeti-type creature while on a hike in 1982, provided those critics with plenty of ammunition to use against her. Others claim that the supposed UFO crashes, excluding Tunguska, were probably downed American spy planes overflying Soviet territory, such as the U-2 or SR-71. Nevertheless, she would remain defiant and continue to speak at symposiums and in interviews while campaigning for increasing transparency from world governments to release the results of their own classified research into UFOs, until she died on November 30th, 2017. Newspapers the world over celebrated her achievements as a test pilot and as an inspiration to women, while quietly including a paragraph or two about her research into UFOs.
When it comes to UFO footage, a majority of the associated proof that follows normally fall into either the blatantly faked category or quality so poor that you cannot distinguish what you are looking at, with the only information on it being from a random person who could just as easily be lying for nothing more than attention. This is a big part as to why many of the UFO or alien videos on the internet almost immediately get labeled as fake and quickly fade into obscurity. The exact reason for this usually falls onto the part that no credible witnesses will claim proof or at the very least acknowledge the supposed encounter with another life form. However, there was one instance where on March 5th, 2004, the Mexican Air Force captured footage of several objects moving at intense speeds, practically matching the speed of military jets. All of this was captured on infrared cameras by credible witnesses. All of these men were ranked members of the Air Force, including a lieutenant and a major. They were not doing this for fame. In fact, they were very well putting their reputations on the line to announce what they were seeing. More specifically, their theories on what they thought it could be. This is the story of the 2004 Mexican Air Force UFO. On March 5, 2004, over the city of Campeche, located about 380 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, during a routine scouting session of drug trafficking via aeroplane was taking place. At around 5 o'clock p.m., while flying at a relatively low altitude, about 11,500 feet, pilots began to notice objects showing up on their radar and quickly were able to see them on their infrared cameras. One of the first odd things they noted was that the radar was only picking up 3 separate objects, yet the cameras were clearly showing a minimum of 8. All of the objects were moving at the same speed, at the same altitude of around 11,500 feet. Over the course of the next 2.5 minutes, the pilots continued watching the objects as they moved at very high speeds. Throughout the course of the video, it is also reported that the objects are on all directions of the jet, almost circling them as if they were about to attack, or they were potentially studying the aircraft. Take a look at this footage to see for yourself.
Pero, a ver, busquen eso que viene atrás de nosotros.
¿Ve cómo se ve como en 2 fotos?
Viene como a las 7, 8 de la posición. Lo raro es que trae una punta adelante. Un puntito adelante. A ver, radar, ¿qué tenemos?
Nada, señor. A ver, permítame.
Son 10, 11 objetos.
Son muchos objetos.
Afirmativo. Iván.
¿Están a la misma altura Telles?
Afirmativo.
Poquito,
arriba. 8, 9, 10, 11 contando toda la cola. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11.
Ok, no sabemos qué estamos viendo, son unos objetos nada más luminosos que vienen a la misma altura que nosotros. Pero no podemos saber qué distancia. ¿Por qué nos vienen siguiendo?
When the jet stopped following the object, it almost immediately disappeared from cameras and radar simultaneously, and they were never seen again. To the shock of those on board, they didn't know it at the time, but they had just captured some of the most convincing UFO footage in recent history, and the story would soon be shared to the public. About a week later, on March 12, 2004, Mexico's Defense Department had a press conference in which they acknowledged the events as well as showed the video to the public in its entirety. While many were shocked at what was shown, the even bigger surprise came from the fact that a government body were the ones showing the footage instead of it coming from a random video on the internet. Following this, the entire team of pilots that were in the jet when the event occurred were also at the press conference and willingly answered all questions the press had for them. One man, Lieutenant German Marin, was asked if he was scared when seeing the objects, and he was quoted as saying, "Was I afraid? Yes. A little afraid because we were facing something that had never happened before." Another one of the pilots, Lieutenant Mario Vasquez, was asked if what they saw, if they thought they were seeing another aircraft, and he was quoted as saying, "I couldn't say what it was, but I think they were completely real." Eventually, questions got around to Major Magdaleno Castanon, and he was asked, in his own words, if he could describe the events that night once he saw the objects in the radar, and during his explanation into the events of that evening, he stated that once the jet began pursuing the object, that he believed they quickly realized what was happening, and that once the jet finally backed off and quit the pursuit, the objects quickly disappeared. Yet, even with both the release of the footage and the recounting of the events from reputable, high-ranking military figures who would gain nothing by talking about it, there were still many to say that these objects were not UFOs, with some going as far as to say the video was a fake. In fact, one of the pilots previously mentioned, Lieutenant Mario Vasquez, defended the infrared footage by saying that there was no way to alter recorded images, and further went on to state that they would have nothing to gain by talking about it. In fact, one of the pilots previously mentioned, Lieutenant Mario Vasquez, defended the infrared footage by saying that there was no way to alter recorded images, and further went on to state that they would have nothing to gain by talking about it. In fact, they would be, in a way, putting their credibility on the line, a point many can agree with, since holding the rank of a lieutenant is very important, and making false claims like this could seriously affect his standing in the military. Even that, though, wasn't enough to sway away doubt from the event. One publisher named Michael Shermer went on live television multiple times and claimed that the pilots didn't even see the objects until after they reviewed the footage, so their claims of pursuing the objects was false since they didn't even know about them. Yet, this was quickly countered by the audio of the recordings in which you can hear the pilots talking to each other about what they're seeing and even counting the objects that they saw. On top of that, you can even hear in their voices that they were becoming nervous, if not flat out scared, by these lights that started to surround them. Another theory that goes into explaining the objects was ball lightning, but was quickly ruled out due to several factors. One being that the altitude recorded was at 11,500 feet, while most, if not all, ball lightning happens near ground level, and also according to weather reports from that day in the area that the conditions were not right to even create ball lightning. And finally, most ball lightning rarely show up in pairs. It is possible, but extremely unlikely, but for there to be 8 or more is almost impossible. Another popular theory was a meteorite breaking up in the atmosphere, and while it could account for the bright intensity of the objects, it is countered back with the unlikeliness that pieces of a meteorite would all stay at essentially the same height for a long period of time, let alone that it appeared that the objects were hovering instead of falling to the ground. Space debris was also thrown in as a possibility, but it was quickly met with the same explanation as the meteorite. There were some that celebrated the news though, that amazing proof had finally been shown of UFOs, and that the military was backing it up, which, up until that point, rarely happened. Let us not forget the weather balloon at Roswell story. But to actually have support from extremely convincing footage went a long way with the UFO community, being described as definitive proof and historic news that proves alien life and that we are not alone. But what we want to know is what you think of this footage. To you, is it proof of alien life? Let us know in the comments, and if you think this isn't of alien origin, we would welcome your thoughts and theories.
Messages from 234 different civilizations all at once. In 2016, Hermano Bora and his graduate student Eric Trottier, both at the University Laval in Canada, announced that they had analysed the spectral data collected by Sloan Digital Sky Survey of 2.5 million stars across our galaxy, searching for Sun-like G-type stars that seemed associated with unusually short signals on the order of 100 picoseconds. This is because the vast majority of natural occurring signals from stars lasts at least 1 second or longer. Bora had, in 2015, published a paper in which he argued that this type of search might be a good way to find signals from extraterrestrial technological civilizations. Sure enough, Bora and Trottier found 234 of them. Nearly all of them were F-type or G-type stars, and about 50 of them showed a signal period of approximately 1.65 pictoseconds. To be fair, the pair proposed 4 possible explanations for their observations, including the possibility that these results were an artifact of the analytical method Bora had devised. And according to SETI's Breakthrough Listen team, there are actually a number of ways in which Bora's method could introduce some spurious results. As of now, attempts to corroborate this discovery have not resulted in any startling announcements. TYC 1220911 is a Sun-like G-star about 100 light years away, somewhat older than our own Sun at 6.3 billion years, and with at least one Neptune-sized planet. In 2010, a powerful radio signal was detected in real life for about 10 seconds, and never heard again. The famous WOW signal, detected in 1977, occurred in a region of the sky with no known objects in the vicinity, was about 72 seconds in duration, and about 30 sigmas above background noise. The TYC signal was 300 sigmas above background. So what was that thing? One popular suggestion is that it was a Benford beacon, named after the astronomer twin brothers James and Gregory Benford. The idea proposed by James, Gregory and James's son Eric, also an astronomer, is that a technological civilization might have various reasons for occasionally blasting power signals into space, for purposes other than communication with us. We do something similar, but not for communication with aliens. We do it, for instance, with the Arecibo telescope on Puerto Rico, in order to attempt to locate potentially hazardous objects, or PHOs, like asteroids. As has been pointed out, if a civilization 100 light years from us were doing this, with a similar type telescope, and just happened to be pointing it in our direction, we'd hear something like the TYC. Or they might be a spacefaring civilization which understandably communicates with its own crafts. It's entirely possible that something else out there in the galaxy might eventually detect these signals purely by accident. And perhaps this is what happened in the case of TYC or even the WOW signal. HD 164595. HD 164595 is a G-type star with one massive planet in the Hercules constellation. In 2015, a 2-second long signal was detected by the Ratan 600 radio telescope in Russia. Although the research team involved delayed announcing this detection for a year, it was a fairly powerful signal, but not inconsistent with any number of known phenomena like stellar flares, an eruption from an active galactic nucleus, a gravitational lensing effect, or some other natural phenomena. It also appeared in a bandwidth, usually associated with military activity, and so it's possible that the source was in fact a now defunct Russian satellite, which could possibly explain the year-long delay in notification of it. But nonetheless, the UFO and alien community are still looking for some answers. SHGB 02 plus 14A. SHGB 02 plus 14A is a mystery. It was detected in 2003 for a total of about 1 minute from an unknown source somewhere between the constellations Pisces and Aries. It was detected 3 times during that 1 minute, at the special frequency of 1420 MHz, the so-called watering hole. It hasn't been heard since then. For the first decades of serious SETI research, the presumption was that a real extraterrestrial signal would have to be strong and repeating. And this was because our naivete, we couched our research in terms of ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence, knowing that we are here and trying to get our attention. But perhaps this was a flawed premise. Perhaps any extraterrestrial intelligence out there might have no idea that we or any other ETIs exist, and so just go about their own business of exploring space and building their civilizations. In doing so, might they sometimes send a signal that we just happen to hear? If so, we are likely to hear it only once, if at all. This is probably the most likely scenario, assuming that if they even exist, are using electromagnetic means of communication. Maybe they're not doing this, and maybe they have something much better, more powerful, and maybe even faster than light. But if we don't have the technology to know and manipulate such things, we won't detect it. What remains the case is that we have in fact heard some very strange things above the background noise of the universe. But we know hardly anything about the universe. We do, however, have some concept from both mathematics and physics of infinity, and in infinity, anything that can happen will happen. From a sample of one, namely Earth, we know that life appeared. We know its chemistry, we know that this chemistry is based on physical laws operative throughout the observable universe, and that these laws tend to result in self-organization and self-replication. These are foundational concepts and are really more important than the discovery of 1 million new species. The American Pentagon has finally acknowledged that there are things in our skies that we do not understand, and so this is at least now a settled issue, but there is still no connection to these strange signals. We also know that what we currently know is a cupful of reality from a vast ocean of existence. Someone else may be out there, somewhere, wrestling with these very same doubts and hopes.